And well, first of all, let me say that from our personal point of view from Athena, this is a very expected talk, because micro-credentials is really one core aspect of what we are trying to do. And we are very keen to get the news of how this is developing. It's a very hot topic in the European agenda for higher education, and I am very pleased to introduce and welcome Mrs. Aurelija Valeikiene, that is coming from Lithuania. She's the director of SQVC, a research group at Vilnius Tech. She has a lot of experience in micro-credentials. She is a Lithuanian External Quality Assurance Agency connected, and also to the NARIC Center from 2004. She is expert in quality assurance, academic recognition of foreign qualifications, and internationalization. Mrs. Aureli is currently a member of the European Commission Expert Group on Micro-Credentials and the Bologna Process peer support group on academic recognition. At the Bologna Secretariat, she was Lithuanian delegate to the working group on structural reforms. She served in the advisory group to support Belarus in the roadmap to European higher education. She has been worked also with ENQA board, where she was an expert for external quality assurance agency reviews. And she served also as honorary treasurer before she was elected president of the Network of Central and East European Accreditation in Higher Education agencies. She has been working also as expert on several initiatives from the Council of Europe, the World Bank, the European Commission, European Training Foundation, Europe Asia Foundation, and many other bodies. So we are in very good hands. Thank you very much for accepting to join us in colloquial talks of the Athena European University, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nuno, for the kind introduction. I would just like to correct that I'm not director, but deputy director of SKVC, which is a Lithuanian quality assurance agency and also an NARIC office. I'm not currently connected to Vilnius Tech, otherwise that I have good colleagues there. But otherwise I work on the national level and also on European levels. In addition, I would like to make a disclaimer from the beginning that really I'm working on this topic of micro-credentials, but by far I'm not an expert in that. And my perspective on micro-credentials is exactly that, from the policy point of view, including external quality assurance, including recognition, and including the international perspective on that. I have not been involved in the internal matters of those kind of things, and I trust that you at the higher education institutions are much better qualified and know what micro-credentials mean in the first instance, from the first hand. So please accept my talk today as just some key questions for consideration. I'm sure that many of these would be already familiar to you. It's just perhaps some additional focus points that I would like to emphasize, especially for the recognition point of view and quality assurance point of view. So this is my opening remarks regarding this. And my first experience that I would like to share with you is really that it landed on my desk, the question of micro-credentials among many other contemporary developments in higher education. And it was really all in a bundle of many things related to innovation in higher education, the questions of how we access higher education and how people proceed in higher education, what is the relationship between the sectors of economy and higher education, and also the sectors of education, and specifically higher education and vocational education and training. And all those online things, the badges, the digital signatures, envelopes, and everything, it's really puzzling. And it's obvious that we need some tools to detangle this cluster of things that come together. And we need to find an approach. And perhaps this is a shared understanding among many stakeholders in Europe, that we need to talk about this. This is obviously very important, both from the perspective of the society and from the perspective of education. And obviously, this is something with which we are going to work for the years to come. As I will show in my further slides, it's in the long-term strategies that stretch upon at least 2027. So for the years to come, we will be preoccupied with this. And I would like to begin with the basics on what you do in higher education institutions. And of course, that is traditional academic degrees and qualifications in cases when institutions are authorized to award professional qualifications. So these are core activities. But it has been a very long tradition, perhaps I wouldn't guess for how many years, if not from the start of the university as an institution, that there were activities related to provision of degrees. And these could have been some preparation courses or foundation courses for people wishing to access higher education, but not yet qualifying in terms of academic standards and other entrance criteria. So this has been a standard offer. From the internationalization point of view, language courses for international students or for immigrant communities wishing to return to their home countries, at least for a short period of time, they could find consolation within the roof of higher education institutions for those kind of experiences, both of learning and cultural enrichment as well. Summer schools have a very long established tradition, and they can include anything from the topics of ethics and generic competences to very specific subjects, like pre-doctoral course on statistics, so that a person qualifies to enter a certain third cycle program. Professional development is something that has been attributed to lifelong learning activities and was targeted not only at external stakeholders, but internal stakeholders within universities. And here, when I'm talking about universities, I mean both sectors of universities of applied sciences, or colleges as they may be called in some context, and also traditional universities. So this is a generic term, what I'm saying. So the professional development component has been strong and sometimes very important for internal audiences within universities as well, especially when it comes to provision of teacher training qualifications, so that people are qualified to teach at higher education level or to occupy certain positions, such as heads of study program committees or deans or whatever it might be. In other cases, there is also a tradition to provide other qualifications for those not directly in teaching, but perhaps in counseling, in advisory services, etc. And there has been a very long tradition in higher education as well, that some degrees could be obtained from the university, not only following the traditional studying route, but by application based on their prior learning, based on their publications and their experiences. First of all, that refers to doctoral degrees that could be provided based on achievements, but not on the study or research course. But most lately, many national qualification frameworks also allow these. So this has been in a traditional package of institutions. And perhaps you can already guess where I'm leading, that these are exactly the examples of how micro-credentials could be shaped currently in academia. What is important to emphasize is really that when we talk about higher education, everything that is done by universities, it clusters around four main pillars. It is customary to put together the personal development aspirations and also the output that is important for the society, that institutions contribute to preserving and nourishing of the democracies, and in instilling the ideas of active citizenship, of active participation in non-governmental organizations and voluntary activities, and being just a decent community member, a good father, a good mother, a good friend, that those kind of values are also transmitted through higher education. And sometimes those two pillars in the middle here, the citizenship and the democratic society output, is coupled with professional development into one, and is referred to as simply the third mission of higher education. Whereas the first and perhaps the largest amount of activities is around provision of studies directly. Many of institutions, of course, have very important research profiles, and production of knowledge and innovation features very high on their agenda. It's very important for institutions in terms of attracting funding and also gaining reputation and their standing in the arena. And lately, this pillar has been very important for the economic well-being as well. However, one of the disclaimers here is to actually warn about the tendency to put a lot of hopes into higher education, that all societal problems would be solved here. I think with the recent upsurge of populist governments and the challenges that we face with the tackling climate problems or migration problems, have demonstrated that it takes a collective effort. But certainly the stakes for higher education are very high. And there is somehow a trend, and especially in terms of the policies, to focus on the societal output, be it the transferable research or the direct preparation for the labor market. And what I mean is here represented in the quotation from the policy that was announced very recently by the European Commission, the skills agenda. And micro-credentials there are mentioned in a very specific setting. It deals primarily with upskilling and reskilling. So it's really labor market focused, and it emphasizes the value of experiences and the need for recognition. And these are two overarching themes that come through this communication and this agenda, that we are really talking about the labor market and expecting that micro-credentials would help to solve the labor market problems, especially exacerbated by the current pandemic because of the COVID-19. And this, while micro-credentials have been long in the profile of higher education institutions, they particularly gained focus and attention in the policy circles with the need to tackle the pandemic and to somehow help lift the economies and help individuals to find their place in the gainful employment. You see here in the quotation that higher education institutions are mentioned among a number of other training providers, and specifically vet providers, but also purely research organizations, industry, other partners, and chambers of commerce, and civil society organizations. So this also has an impact. What are expectations on universities in provision of micro-credentials? It has far-reaching consequences to be part of those partnerships, and also to provide vital assurance on quality and facilitate recognition of micro-credentials. This is one of the visual graphics from the skills agenda. And here, last year, and I would like just to reiterate that really we are working in terms of the policies with very fresh things, but the course on which we should be devoting our efforts was already identified there. And that is the flexibility, the assurance of quality, necessary support for validation and guidance in terms of recognizing qualifications, but also in obtaining qualifications and planning careers. The visibility aspect has to do a lot with trust and transparency. And these are two vital issues for the micro-credentials to provide value which they are expected to provide. For the digital transportation of micro-credentials, so to say, there are already a number of tools developed and employed. But of course, the European Union is especially promoting the tools in which it already invested, and Europass comes among one as one such tool. From the policy perspective, when we go closer to the education, we have again last year's communication on the goal to develop the European education area by year 2025. And there are several issues highlighted there. First of all, it talks about automatic recognition of qualifications and periods of study. This is absolutely clear. Recognition of prior learning comes among the issues identified, but of course this is not automatic. But for the qualifications that belong to Bologna frameworks, the expectation is that it happens smoothly and without much of the additional efforts. I would like to say that currently in Europe, we have several treaties that deal with automatic recognition, and these are regional treaties. One such treaty, and the first in Europe, was signed among the Benelux countries, and the second regional recognition treaty was signed among the Baltic countries, between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. and we are very close. And at the end of May, if everything goes as planned, there should be a joint treaty, the interregional treaty between the Benelux and the Baltic countries signed. And this will be a major milestone in that, because that treaty is expected to function in a way like the Schengen Treaty functions. That is, other countries which are currently not parties of the convention, and currently we have 6 countries only working with that treaty, that they will be able to join this treaty. And so this will serve as an overarching instrument for Europe to achieve the goal of automatic recognition. Of course, this type of recognition is based on the legal provisions, but the ENIC-NARIC community has been working long and hard on de facto automatic recognition. That is not based on legal instruments, but on unilaterally applied good practices for accepting other country qualifications that belong to Bologna framework as their own qualifications. So legal way is not the only way, but of course, this is very much promoted as a binding instrument and helping to achieve transparency that we are there with this goal. The second issue with this communication on creation of the European education area was a big emphasis on digital aspects. And here again, the expectation is that institutions would be awarding credentials, and not only micro-credentials, but all sorts of credentials in digital formats. And that by this, the transfer between institutions and mobility between systems would be very much facilitated. So these are 2 major factors coming with this commitment for the joint education area. And there, micro-credentials also found their place. They are specifically mentioned that portability of such micro-credentials is of concern towards the achievement of the common goals. Now, coming to perhaps one of the major issues, how we define micro-credentials. This is the understanding that is currently shared in Europe. And this definition of what a micro-credential is, to a degree, functions like the European qualifications framework is functioning. That is, it applies and it pertains both to the education sector, but also the labor market sector. You see from the formulations that it's very inclusive, it's very broad, that a micro-credential is a proof of the learning outcomes that a learner has acquired by the short learning experience. And this is not specifically talking about a student, which we have in higher education, but a learner that could be on various levels and in various settings. The other basic standard, if you wish, with the micro-credential is that there has to be transparent assessment. There has to be a framework, standards, how we evaluate achievements of learners, and to be sure that the instruments by which we assess are fit for that purpose. The third aspect of the micro-credential relates to the digital aspects and to vast arrays of information, that it should contain the learning outcomes. It should be clear what the assessment method was, who was the awarding body, and the level at which the learning took place, and if there were, what kind of credits were gained. It's very important aspect that micro-credentials are expected to function as something owned by the learner and accessed by the learner, stored somewhere in the clouds, and transported by the learner's wish wherever the person needs this information to travel, to another institution in the labor market, to another institution in the education sector. And that somehow it could be connected to other pieces of learning and to accrue to larger credentials or even entire qualifications. In order to achieve that goal, of course, quality assurance should be backing this learning and assessment by certain standards. So this is the quotation from the report that is created by the contract with the European Commission that the Danish Technological Institute has. But this definition, even though you see here the names of the authors of the report, if you open the report, you would see a very large list of countries and experts who participated and contributed to that. And I can assure that really the consultations were very extensive. I had the privilege to participate in those and really could influence the final formulation that you see here today. So it's encouraging to see that really the dialogue is taking place. When we come to higher education, the formulation of what the micro-credential is becomes more specific. And if you wish, I could say and make such an analogy, like we have the European qualifications framework for the lifelong learning, but we also have the European higher education framework, the Bologna framework. And here the micro-credential is defined in terms of the usual Bologna tools. The expectation, of course, is to have the learning outcomes at the center, to have the clear level in terms of the national or European qualifications framework, to have the expression of the learning in ECTS credits, clear description of the assessment methods and criteria, and everything subject to the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance. If we go further from the bottom, the next point that you see here, the larger framework in which micro-credentials fit, you would see here the parallel with the 4 missions of higher education. And immediately it broadens up. Remember, the labor market is focused on itself, on competitiveness of the labor market, on the GDPs and everything else. When we talk about micro-credentials provided by higher education institutions, they are not only for the labor market, they are for the person. They are for personal aspirations, for cultural needs, for any needs that the person wishes to develop further. The next item that is very specific for the recognition is that we are lucky to have the legal instrument, the Lisbon Recognition Convention, that underpins the work of both the higher education institutions in recognizing qualifications and also the ENIC-NARIC offices and RPL as a mechanism. I would like to say that in the first instance, in the rounds of consultations, it emerged as if recognition of prior learning was the way for inclusion of micro-credentials into higher education. And that would be a mistake to assume that this is the preferred venue to go. in fact, when we talk about higher education, the primary instrument here should be the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And the periods of study that are perfectly covered by the Lisbon Recognition Convention and supported by a very specific instrument, the ECTS Users Guide, on providing guidance on how the credits are transferred between the systems. The last point here about the small volume. There was a study conducted, and you see the logo here on my slide in terms of the EU-supported project called Microball. And that study included 35 countries in Europe and asked questions on the current situation, where we are with micro-credentials. And it was interesting to see that micro-credentials could be anything from 1 ECTS up to 100 ECTS. Basically, it could be up to whatever amount which does not constitute a full short cycle qualification or a full qualification on the bachelor level. However, again, during discussions with institutions, there was a wide consensus that everything costs, and every ECTS and every organized learning and course requires effort of production and proper assessment and standards and recognition and certification and documents. So it requires efforts. And even though it's not fixed, but somehow the shared understanding was that it's really not worth it if it is less than 10 ECTS points. However, there is no such a standard. So I'm just saying what was discovered by the survey, but really the variety is great. The good news is that the area of micro-credentials is developing and developing fast. Here you see a very nice color map or a cover which shows in different colors different types of micro-credentials that countries attributed. So you see that what are predominant types of micro-credentials are special purpose awards or additional supplemental courses in higher education. And those might be needed for people to get admission into higher education or in order to complement their knowledge and skills so that they graduate within their chosen program, being able to satisfy the graduation requirements. This is the second in the blue color, what I just said. The MOOCs, the SPOCs, and various other things, they are to a less degree popular. What you also see from this map is that there is a feeling that some of these courses might be overlapping. And I think that this is true. And this is because of the fact that at the time when the study was conducted, there was no shared definition of what the micro-credential is. So basically, respondents of the study were left to define micro-credentials as they are used in their contexts. So thus, you see here great variety, that we have open studies. But what does it mean, open studies? It's just a mode of provision, but not something other that is signaled by this title. Informal learning, yes. What does it mean, the informal learning or specialization courses? Could they be the same or could they be not? It still remains to be seen. The biggest result of this study is that really the area is greatly developed. And countries reported that almost half of the countries reported that micro-credentials can build up to a degree. Other countries did not say that this is the case. The great majority of countries expressed that micro-credentials would not be accepted if they are not offered by the higher education providers. We know that micro-credentials can be used as an alternative route into higher education, but not all countries allow such an access by legislation. The hurdle for recognition is that not all countries have registers. And by registers, I mean the registers of higher education providers, but more importantly, registers of non-formal education providers who could also be offering micro-credentials. The good news is that 23 countries of 35 countries served answered that micro-credentials have place in their systems, that they are actually allowed. Now, moving to the quality assurance, I come from the Quality Assurance Agency and am a big fan of the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance. And the good news is that ESGs are generic. When you read the preamble, they pertain to all studies provided by higher education institutions. And the definition of the program, which is further meant in the text of the ESGs, is understood as any type of learning offered by a university. So by definition, ESGs apply to micro-credentials. Another thing is that when we talk about large partnerships which may be offering micro-credentials, and I just listed some of the partners who could be contributing to the development and provision of the course. The good news is that if you are involved in such a provision, you are responsible. Ultimately, the burden of quality assurance comes onto the higher education institution. We don't have any other instrument, and we don't have any other place to go for assuring of quality aside of higher education institutions. And this is also a key consideration for micro-credentials to be accepted and to be able to be transportable between the institutions. Assured by you, then they have recognition. This is basically it. It comes down to this very simple thing. But at the same time, this is very challenging, and I understand that this comes as an extra obligation for a higher education institution. Another extra obligation deals with the alignment to the qualifications framework and to the expectation to provide clear documentation. We have such a tool as the diploma supplement, which is a wonderful tool for a complete qualification. We need something similar for the micro-credential. At the moment, this type of document or template is non-existent. There is just some sort of understanding what should be reflected, and what should be reflected actually comes from the recognition point of view. What is important for the recognition community so that the micro-credential is accepted. The usage of credits, or at least expression of the workload in hours, is really a must. Otherwise, we don't know how large or how small this piece of learning is, and how it fits with other parts of education, and how it could be stacked, accumulated, and transported. When we talked between quality assurance agencies about micro-credentials, it was clear that most of the agencies would rely on higher education institutions for their internal quality assurance to cover micro-credentials. And from the point of view of external quality assurance, there would be no additional procedures. It would be covered by the standard procedures. And this means that sometimes micro-credentials would be lost, so to say, if we are evaluating just entire higher education institutions. So then, by the effectiveness of internal quality assurance, we would assume that micro-credentials are covered. Some quality assurance agencies, however, do have a specific mandate to look at micro-credentials if they are provided not by higher education institutions, but by other providers. But this is more an exception than a rule around Europe. Now coming to another very important point on recognition, because this is the key for the micro-credentials to be transported, to be stacked, and to be used for further education purposes. You see here the list of the main pieces of information that should come together with the micro-credential awarded by you. And that is the clear definition of the quality of the course or the module, the aspects of the authenticity and the ability to verify both the provider and the learner. A lot of micro-credentials are provided online, and there comes the issues of academic integrity and authenticity. This is partly a technological aspect, but it's also an ethical aspect. So there needs to be clarity regarding those. And the other things, they are more standard: the level of the course, the learning outcomes, the workload. In addition to what is provided in the diploma supplements, would be an expectation for some information on the ways of assessment, the ways of learning, the ways of assessment. This is it from the recognition community and the standard instruments that we have. As I mentioned, first it was considered that RPL is the root, but then really the Lisbon Recognition Convention should be the primary route for recognition of micro-credentials and transfer of credits using the principles of the ECTS user guide. Now I'm coming to my concluding points regarding micro-credentials. And I would like to say that, yes, there are a lot of high hopes associated. There is very clear and strong political support from the European Union institutions, sometimes from the national policies as well. Although the study that was done in terms of the microball project discovered that 21 countries still doesn't have a digital policy. So it means that it's still open to the inclusion. It's still in the phase of the development. As to the national qualifications frameworks, in 15 countries, they are open for the inclusion, in other countries not. So this is again a question on the policy level, how we document that and how we incorporate that into the larger frameworks. The funding for micro-credentials currently, to the biggest degree, is expected to come from the European Social Fund, and a lot of funds are earmarked within the new Erasmus Plus program. These are primary instruments. And this comes also as a relief for the economic recovery in terms of economic measures through the resilience recovery funding as well. The strength of the concept of micro-credential comes from the undefined nature of what it could be. As you saw, higher education institutions view micro-credentials as anything fitting the labor market, fitting the person, fitting the cultural and societal needs, and flexibility and the possibility to include various new things into it and really help the learner to define the learning are clearly the strengths of the micro-credential. However, it does not come without weaknesses, and the question of finances comes here in the long term. We have seen, for example, that joint degree programs have received a lot of EU support, and there was a large wave of developing and offering joint degree programs. However, they require effort on the part of institutions, and they are not the way to make money, to put it bluntly. For the micro-credentials, the question is the same. The labor market may be needing something, but are they ready to step in and support financially so that people are able to choose the learning of their needs? The ambivalent nature of the micro-credentials has a downside as well. Another aspect that particularly comes with the specificity of higher education is that higher education is not just pure technical learning and gaining of knowledge and skills. If that would be the case, we would not need the teachers, we would not need fellow students in the classrooms, and we would not have such a crisis, I would say, with university education as it is now. When students at Harvard and other most prestigious world universities said that they are suspending their education, they did so because they lacked interaction. Because of the pandemic restrictions, people are not communicating the ways they used to. And this tacit knowledge that is gained between or from the communication between the students and their teachers and among students themselves is lacking. The remote education is not quite the same as the classroom education. And the continuity of this educational experience is seen as being broken down with micro-credentials. Academics especially worry that if we divide education into very small pieces of learning, it becomes too small, and the parts into which we divide education, when we put together, does not come to the same whole unity. The methods of assessment might be different. The material that is covered in learning might be different and not perfectly matching, not the way it is designed when we have full programs, full degree programs offered by institutions. So not everybody is very enthusiastic about micro-credentials. And I have been reading some critical remarks, especially from established institutions, which see micro-credentials as a threat and being in competition with their traditional offer of degrees. And then there comes the question of the work conditions for the professors and for the administrative staff. If they are to provide very small things in multiple increments and in multiple offerings, it requires efforts, it requires time. And where is the biggest value? Is it in the full degree, or is it in these small pieces of learning? In some national contexts, it also depends upon the tradition. If we have great variety of qualifications as a tradition in education sectors, micro-credentials might have easier time to find their place in those systems. In systems where there is greater access to higher education and a larger proportion of populations have gained higher education, micro-credentials may not have such a critical value in that particular context. And as I just said, there are high hopes, but the question is, could micro-credentials solve all the issues with the competitiveness of the economies and other challenges that our societies are facing? They clearly represent many opportunities to attract other types of students into education, which are not entering traditional degree programs. They provide marketing potential, and especially for international students as well. They could be stacked. In some cases, it is possible to award a degree, as I said, based just on a collection of pieces of learning. Not all systems that accommodate, but in some systems that is perfectly possible. And of course, the uptake of the micro-credentials depend a lot on their digitalization, on how convenient it would be use them over time and between institutions and learners. So these are the opportunities that are associated with this new development. This is it from my side. These are my sources that I used, and also insights from some of the discussions that we had with colleagues in credential evaluation and in quality assurance. I hope that it provided some useful thought for thinking to you. And I'm looking forward to some questions if you may have.
Well, Mrs. Aurelia, thank you very much for this very clear and very rich talk about micro-credentials. I have one question that I'm not sure if Course has already asked you. Is it possible to share this presentation, this PowerPoint with us, because you have all these links, all this information is very relevant. Thank you very much. Questions, please. Well,
I see a comment here regarding micro-credentials. Yes, it's not just a European thing. It's very well established in Australia. However, I'm really not familiar with those contexts as my work primarily is focused on Europe. So I would not be able to comment on that, but it's clearly not just a European phenomenon or a response to economic for the need for the economy to recover and for the citizens to gain skills.
Thank you on your presentation. Because I think it was very useful. I personally was not acquainted with the meaning of micro-credentials before. I mean, it was not clear. I have heard the term, but I was not aware of the fact, what does it really mean? And your presentation was very clear and very useful. I think regarding people like myself, I have an MA degree, and then I would like to make an advancement in my career, and I will find, personally, I would find these credential degrees or whatever evaluation they offer, something that, I don't know, might be more affordable to me in financial sense. And if they are offered online, then they will probably spare me some time up. I mean, it's obvious that it takes effort and time, but when you work from home, sometimes is much more easier than when you have to travel all the time, especially if you have in mind that most of us have a job that they cannot get away from for a long time.
Yes, I absolutely share your view that in many cases, micro-credentials are seen to be in addition to higher education degrees, but not as a substitute for those degrees. And the European Universities Association was also very keen to communicate that when they support micro-credentials, they are talking that they are in addition to regular degrees, but not as a substitute, not as a threat for the regular provision.
We were aware of that fact, but again, we will gain additional knowledge and be more professional on the things that we already do. I mean, we don't have to have a degree to be more skillful and competent in our knowledge. It just help us to get more informed and more educated in what we do.
Anne, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I really wanted to thank you so much, Anne Delouis. I'm at the University of Orléans in France. And I just wanted to say that your disclaimer was, from my point of view, completely unnecessary, because you clearly are an expert with a lot of practical knowledge. And I really admired also your powerful conclusion, because we are at the university, we are more than a service provider. I completely agree with that, as would most of my colleagues. I think when we've got limited human resources and we need to see how much manpower and brain power we would put into these micro-credentials to skill the European workforce, upskill the European workforce. But it's a very powerful and interesting tool. And I had just very practical question, the new Europass, do you have any experience with it? It seems to be, it changed a lot in last year. Apparently there's this new tool for micro-credentials in the new Europass. And have you used it already in Lithuania, perhaps?
Thank you. This is a very difficult question, and I'm really not in a position to answer that. I know that there has been work done for the integration with the Europass, but I'm not the person to answer that.
And it is still under development. So the European Commission is going to finalize it by 22, as far as I remember.
All right, so, it's still pilot, perhaps.
Yes, it will serve as a digital tool for holding micro-credentials online. So yeah, it will be used for that as well.
Right.
Well, I have one question that I already heard of limits for the number of ECTS credits that are going to be considered for a micro-credential. You just mentioned 10 ECTS credits. I have heard before 4 ECTS. I have already heard someone from the Commission saying there will be no limit. From my personal point of view, I wish there is no limit. So what do you have any insights on this?
Yes, thank you. In the study that was conducted, that I mentioned, the Microball project, 35 countries, when they reported on how many credits currently micro-credentials constitute, it was anything from 1 to 100, and it's really great variety. The intention from the European perspective is to keep it open and to keep it flexible and not to have any limit, so to say. It's only that people were saying, how much does it cost to create a micro-credential which is worth 1 ECTS credit? Is it really worth? And what learning outcomes you can propose that people achieve with this 1 ECTS? Because this has to be very applicable and useful thing. So is it not too small? Maybe not. Maybe you just learn one particular skill, very small skill, and that is enough. I don't know. So, but the political intention is to keep it open and flexible, and the limit is really up to the credit range when you already have a full qualification. So the short cycle qualification, how many credits that would be, you can count in your contexts. Yes, is it 90 ECTS or is it 120 ECTS or short cycle qualifications? But then short cycle qualification, I'm sorry, first cycle qualifications, but these are already much larger things. So it's varied.
Well, I hope you can hear me. There is a bit of noise below me. But do you know if there is, besides political intentions, any real expectation from the labor market, from the industry with regards to micro-credentials?
It depends really upon the industry and upon the context. I remember that some 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion with major employers in IT sector in Lithuania, and we were discussing their needs, and they were saying that they would prefer that our institutions develop short cycle qualifications, but not micro-credentials. So this is interesting, because one of the expectations and the stimulus for the development of micro-credentials really came from IT sector. There you could have small pieces of learning, you can achieve certain competencies and you can apply them in the labor market. And there is a very strong tradition of provision of certificates by giants like Microsoft or Google or whatever types of private employers we may have at hand. Even LinkedIn recently came to offer micro-credentials, wishing to establish themselves in this market. So really, to some part, it's like parallel worlds. In some cases, employers don't need higher education institutions. They have their qualifications that are labor market qualifications that could be termed micro-credentials. But the problem with them is how to transport them for the purpose of further learning. For the usage in the labor market, there is no question. They are perfectly useful and applicable, they have their place, but how to use this learning for further progression in higher education? This is an unanswered question. And there would be a need for the bridge for between the sectors. But who acts as a bridge? Quality assurance and recognition acts as a bridge. In order for them to happen, you already need an array of instruments, like I described. You need to have expression of the learning outcomes. You need to have the credits range. You need to be sure that the learning which is claimed to be taken place was exactly by that person and not his or her friend or another entity. So there are very many issues. The European Commission has very strong interest in bridging those worlds. And thus the definition of the micro-credential, as I showed, is very broad and loose there. For the higher education sector, the absolute, no question agreement is that we have to use Bologna tools. So how to make employers to use Bologna tools? I don't know. Do they need them? Probably not. But if you talk to employers and if they agree to work with you, and then you have the possibility to apply the Bologna tools, then I think the use of this micro-credential for further progression in education has much better chances.
So just in continuation of this, who do you see is the main, let's say, client for micro-credentials? Is it someone that is trying to upskill or reskill his professional profile? Are these the companies? Who do you see as the main client here?
It has to be defined by the market research, I guess. Currently, the expectation is that these would be people who already have qualifications, but they would need to update their skills, to add some new competencies to their profile in order to re-enter the labor market if they lost their jobs because of the pandemic or because of the economic difficulties. So this is now identified as the primary audience. But remember, I also mentioned that international students whom you wish to attract into higher education may also be among those target audiences. And this would be a very specific type of micro-credential. So there are many opportunities for those.
Thank you very much. I have still a few questions, but I hope that there is some more from the audience. I don't see any hand raised.
There are questions in the chat.
No, in the chat there are no questions.
No.
There is a question about ECTS.
Are all micro-credentials expressed in ECTS?
It's by far not in all cases. Currently, the study showed that in 17 countries, they would be expressed in ECTS credits, but not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And even within the same country, it would depend upon the provider. There is great variety, no uniform approach to that.
So, can I ask a question? Sorry, I just jumped from another meeting and I was looking forward to finish this. Are there any link between micro-credentials and ECTS with the how can I say, with workload? So we know that regarding ECTS, it's one ECTS corresponds to the 25 hours to 30 hours of workload with the students. Is there any similar assignment regarding micro-credentials?
No, it's actually when you, if you are using ECTS credits, then it's your standard definition of what it is. The only thing that is needed is really when you issue this micro-credential that you clearly describe in the documentation what it is. Was it 26 hours of learning or was it 30 hours of learning? Or was it something in between? Because this is important for the recognition and for the stackability and further progression.
Mm-hmm. So Aurelia, so micro-credentials are linked to the learning time. This is learning time, this is teaching time, or it is like the workload for the students?
It's learning outcomes.
Learning outcomes.
Yeah.
So I mean, so this
the students' work.
The student work. So one micro-credential, let's say in HMU, could be something, a different definition than a micro-credential in Vilnius Tech?
In principle, yes, it could be. But what you should do, it's really to express what type of learning, what amount of learning, which level of learning took place in the documentation that you issue with the micro-credential. It should be absolutely clearly defined. This is prerequisite for the recognition of the micro-credential, because otherwise we don't know what to do with that and how to deal with that. And if that is not clear, what happens is that people are losing when moving between the institutions and between the systems. If some pieces of information are absent, what do you do at the university? If you don't see something, you assume there was nothing, right? So it has to be described.
So I can see here a question from Justina Blue. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. What could be the role of VET organizations in microcredential systems? And how about non-formal education? And sounds similar like ECVAT credit system. So the first question is like, what could be the role of VET organizations in microcredential systems?
It's not defined. It's what you agree. If you see the value of partnership between yourself and some VET provider, it's up to you to define what would be the input of that VET institution and what would be the input of your institution. There are some micro-credentials which are offered by just VET providers. It does not necessarily has to be on the higher education level. It's not limited to that.
And the second question is from Justina, is like, and how about non-formal education? I mean, I suspect the application of microcredentials.
Yes, as I showed you the color map of those various microcredentials, what they are at the moment, they are offered in non-formal education. The problem with that is that when it happens in non-formal education, what type of supporting instruments you have that enable their recognition? What is the quality assurance, and what is the learning outcome expressed somehow in credits, in other types of measurements, in ECTL, I'm sorry, ECVET credits or whatever. So the problem with non-formal providers is that when those micro-credentials are issued within a sector, there could be sectoral qualification frameworks. Yes?
Thank you.
For some sectors of economy. So there might be some transparency behind this. In other cases, not.
I hope that Christina is satisfied.
Aurelia, if I
Another
may.
question, please mute your microphone, Uno. Hi, thanks for the presentation. The best training. There is a back noise. Hi, thanks for presentation. The best training set for measure and promote the success of microcredentials could be the application of this label to MOOCs. So to apply microcredential to massive open online courses. What changes are necessary on MOOCs designed to be recognized easily?
It was on my slides. Remember this question mark and 7 or 8 points. As long as you have those, it's fine. In the INIC community, we were gathering examples of documentation when MOOCs providers were issuing to their graduates. And some institutions are just so happy to award a MOOC that they provide no information, just their logo, the name of the person, that this was a MOOC on this topic, and that's it. And you have basically nothing. And you have nothing to do and how to recognize this. So for the MOOCs, the essential pieces of information are in, yeah, let me see, how many points? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 points, as I showed on my slide.
So Aurelia, do you think that platforms like EDX and Coursera, that now they provide even degrees through MOOCs courses, they are going to employ and leverage the use of micro-credentials in order to make more credible the certificates that they provide?
That's a difficult question. I don't know. What I saw, but by far this may not be the whole truth, so don't take my word as a final truth. In most of the cases, still the degree is awarded by the higher education institution, but not by the provider. This goes back to the tradition of what the degree is.
In case of MOOCs, no, they provide it, you know, by EDX, which is a federation of high-profile universities. So they use it as a certificate that someone can use it, like the diploma supplement courses that the students, they can register if they follow during their Erasmus visit courses that they are not among within the home university curriculum. So it's like an extra certificate that it's credible because it comes like from, you know, a very prestigious platform. But other platforms that they are not so famous, I think that they will follow your exams using micro-credentials in order to justify and support what do they provide. So let's see, Justina, thank you for the answer. It seems that it will be a dream to have unified system for recognition if gained knowledge in different levels. So let me read it again because I did not get it. Thank you for the answer. It seems that it could be a dream to have unified system for recognition if gained knowledge. Okay, I got it now. Okay.
If I may, I have still 1 or 2 questions. Is it okay, or
yeah, of course. Yes.
Okay, so one of them, and Aurelia, you were mentioning a while ago when we were discussing the length of these micro-credentials, 1 or 2 ECTS or 10 ECTS. You were saying if it was, if we could somehow justify the cost of finding a micro-credential for 1 ECTS, but as I understood, the certification of micro-credentials will be assured by the university itself. So there is no external certificate agency, let's say. So I don't see what is the real cost here. So what do you mean when you talk about the cost of organizing this micro-credential? And if there is already some template where we have the set of indicators that we can use for the recognition of the quality so that we can start standardizing our degrees. This is one. Okay.
Thank you. It's a very good point. It's your internal costs. As long as you develop the course, how much time and effort you put into that, that is your cost. And your internal quality assurance to go through the internal procedures, etc. And the marketing that you would need to put into in order to attract learners to this course. This is your internal cost. Okay. And the question is, when the MOOCs came, there was like this great sentiment and expectation that almost everybody can offer a MOOC and establish themselves as providers and gain reputation in this way and eventually maybe earn money from this. But what appeared from MOOCs was that MOOCs are targeted not at the audience of those who do not have higher education, but rather from the analysis of the major MOOCs providers, it was seen that those already with advanced higher education degrees are taking the MOOCs. So the target audience was different. And then the question is, are you really able to upscale, to multiply, to attract learners to this? If you can just create the course and let it roll on its own, or is it still needed that you take care of it? Does it need it on the level of teachers, or can it be done on the level of assistants and administrators? How this will work? Because this is where your costs come. So it's really up to you to see how much potential you have. Some of the micro-credentials, I understand they are of absolute necessity for the internal stakeholders. Like if you accepted international students, yes, and you allow that their initial preparation may not be on the required level 100%, yes, and you expect that a person is learning not only the course in which the person was enrolled, but also taking additional small modules in order to compensate lack of the knowledge and skills that they have not obtained in their background. This small module or learning might be of absolute necessity. It's not a luxury that you are earning something. It's to provide validity for your degree, that you assure quality of your studies. In other cases, yes, this might be something from what you earn in addition. So there is a lot on the menu, so to say.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, what is a micro-credential? Is this a certificate that the student holds? Is it something that has to be registered in the legacy system of the university? What is it? I mean, can I give a certificate to my students for the course that I'm teaching now? In the end of the semester, they were assessed. Can I give them a micro-certificate? What is this in the end of the day?
It has to be institutionalized. It's not your individual initiative that you are doing this because you wish to do so, because there has to be institutional backing. After all, it's not you as a person, it's you as a university professor who are offering this course. So the micro-credential is essentially falling on the institution.
So does this mean that universities who wish to take this micro-credentials approach need to have, let's say, a department or some body that can certify and assure these micro-credentials under proposal of teachers or researchers or whatever?
It's basically that you should develop your internal policy on how you approach the micro-credential. You may label as a micro-credential something which you have provided for decades, so to say. Yes, like summer schools or language training or whatever, or it may be new things. So in order to have recognition and transportability, you have to establish your internal policy of what it is and how you support with documentation what it is, so that it is transported and recognized, and it is not only of value at the moment when the person is taking the course or the module, but that it has value over longer periods of time.
Yes, that is a very important aspect. Okay, so but this is still an initiative from the university, and how can the university communicate this through its own channels to its audience? But how does the supranational, the national organisms know that this particular university is issuing these micro-certificates, even at national and at European level? How can this be somehow disseminated?
This is a very good question. This is key point, because there has to be a national policy regarding this and an agreement. Remember, I talked about the registers. Some countries, and Lithuania is definitely among those, we have a register of higher education providers. We have a register of non-formal providers, because the state is also overseeing this activity, that not everybody just can go onto the street and teach, and this has consequences for the person and for the society. So on the national level, there has to be an agreement regarding the policy, how we approach this issue, and the transparency that we assure that these micro-credentials are discussed in terms of quality assurance. If I said that the regular ESG instruments should apply, it could be the same repeated somewhere in the national policy, that yes, in our context, the same ESGs apply. So the regular instruments, no additional external evaluation. Internally, yes, it's an additional evaluation for you because this is an additional award. But externally, it could be said that this comes with the whole package and other aspects. It has to be agreed and recorded somewhere. And this takes stakeholders to communicate with your quality assurance agency, with your ENIC-NARIC office, with your ministry, with the rectors conference, with students union.
Okay. What? Yeah, may I just one last question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I see micro-credentials, and this is also connected to trustworthiness and transferability. I see this matching very well with blockchain solutions. Do you know if there is any standard that we can or should use? No. Okay.
Currently, as far as I know, there are several standards used. No one European standard.
Aurelia,
sorry, Costa.
I was late.
I was referring to a standard to describe the micro-credentials for some blockchain solution, not blockchain itself, but a standard, a template where we detailing the information we should provide for a blockchain certificate related to micro-credentials in specific. But I understood, no, there is not yet something like that.
I would advise you to have another expert talking to you. And Anthony Camilleri might be the one.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so just a second, my last question. So how do universities in the future get the permission? Do they need some kind of accreditation process or something in order to gain the right for offering micro-credential courses?
It depends upon the national policy and the national context, how it is regulated.
Okay,
currently, not all countries are regulating this. And this could mean also the good news that you are free to do something, but this could also mean the bad news, that if it is not agreed, then perhaps it's wiser to agree first and then go and work and invest your time and effort into that.
Thank you.
Aurelia, a last question, because I think that, we have overcome. It was very nice because it seems that your talk was very engaging, and we are keeping the questions like 39 minutes after the end of the talk. I mean, listening you right now, why a university to prefer to accredit or to promote micro-credentials instead of ECTS? ECTS also is an internal process. I mean, we assign ECTS to our courses. I mean, depending on the time and on the standard definition of the ECTS. Why an institution to prefer micro-credentials than to follow, the route that we know, like with ECTS?
One reason to do that would be to actually see how you could satisfy the labor market need and to use additional funding which is currently offered for that.
Direct.
I think this is a safe way currently, because in the Erasmus Plus program and also in the ESF funding, there are specific pockets for micro-credentials. And this is a safe way for you to try to see whether it works, whether you can develop this and accelerate and use further. Or maybe it appears that you did your best, but somehow the uptake was not as expected, and it remained a limited initiative. You may not know at the beginning. You should do the market research, and you could try. But for the successful effort, I would say that you need to talk to the employers, because currently the expectation for the development of micro-credentials is that really stakeholders come together and that different sectors come together.
So the main motivation in order to introduce the micro-credential is like to provide more impact to the higher education institutions, to the market. So to be able, to attract and train, people from the market. All right. Okay, thank you. It's very clear. Okay. Do we have any other question? Okay, first of all, I would like to thank Nuno for this extra duty today. I would like to thank also Aurelija for, I suspect it was very nice talk from the number of the questions and the engagement. I think it was I'm pretty sure that it was a very nice talk. I'm looking forward to follow the recorded file. I would like to thank all the participants for your participation. We're going to continue next week with another talk how to use technology along learning and teaching. So this is another talk from an Israeli colleague, and we are looking forward to meeting you again. So Aurelija,
sorry if I may, just very briefly, because I believe people that are in this session are interested in micro-credentials, and we are going to have one talk on the 5th of May from a governmental body from the Ireland, where they have the QQI, which is very much linked to this, and I think it will be after this incredible introduction, a very, very interesting also approach.
Let me contact with them, and then we're going to disseminate, and we're going to update the website of this extra contribution. So this is going to be an extra contribution to our program that started last week, and we're going to continue until the end of June. So we're going to have the contribution that just Nuno has mentioned as a continuation of the talk of Aurelija. So thank you very much, Nuno, for the contribution, and also for the reminding us this input from the Irish College. So until then, stay safe, and see you next week. And Aurelija probably will
bye. Thank you.
very soon.
Bye. Bye. Thank you very much, Aurelija.
Nuno, send me the video.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.